Welcome to another episode of the Give Me Liberty podcast. Look, the American education system has been infiltrated by the radical left. Their influence spans from the lecture halls of our most elite, put that in scare quotes, academic institutions, all the way down to the kindergarten classrooms and even the reading rooms in your public libraries across the country. It is time for Christians to stand up. But does that mean ditching public education? Get ready, buckle up for another exciting episode of the Give Me Liberty podcast with Nick Freitas, starting now. And welcome back to the Give Me Liberty podcast. I'm joined by Nick Freitas, host of Making the Argument podcast. Nick, welcome.
Oh, thank you very much for having me.
Man, it's an honor, and I will just say we were reminiscing just a few moments ago. The last time that we had a conversation together was back in 2020. You were running for Congress. By the way, I will tell you, you were the better candidate in that election, but you didn't prevail, and that's okay. But brother, thank you so much for all that you do. I love your content. I love the message you're putting out. Especially when it comes to the issue of masculinity. My goodness, we find ourselves in a strange woke culture. I'll just tell you just really fast, quick aside. The other day was the anniversary of Pearl Harbor. And for some reason, has nothing to do with Pearl Harbor, but I went back to the movie Patton, George C. Scott, the 1970 film, that first 6 minutes of that speech. And I played that with our Freedom Center staff. I was just like, how different by comparison is our culture today versus that time? And that was a very motivating, it's an iconic speech, okay? Warning, there's a little bit of language, those, who might be watching, but man, it was fantastic. And you look at our culture today and just how weak everything has become. We don't call good good anymore. We don't call evil evil anymore. And we don't have any aspiration to do hard things.
Yeah. I do. I love that movie Patton. It was one of my favorites really growing up. And yeah, that opening speech is just incredible. I don't think anybody can imagine General Milley giving that speech today. And that's certainly doesn't bode well for the United States in general and specifically our military.
Who knows? Maybe they're checking to see if you were inspired by that, and that may be like a red flag for them.
Right.
Like a little signpost. Hey, we need to move you on. But I want to go back to this day event, another day of infamy, right? October the 7th. Hamas poured out unspeakable evil on the nation of Israel, nation state of Israel. You think about people being beheaded. Children being cooked in ovens, women being raped, people being carried off, right, as hostages. It was the most unspeakable evil. There is video footage that the IDF has not released to everyone. I mean, just recently, even Dr. Phil, right? Dr. Phil is hardly a winger. Okay, he's a centrist. He could afford to be a little bit more tough these days, but even he was outraged by the response of these university presidents. That on December 5th they had a sworn-in hearing, congressional hearing, and Penn State, Harvard University, MIT. I mean, these are elite institutions. They failed at the most basic question about genocide, about answering questions about intifada, from the river to the sea. They could not answer those questions. UPenn president is now resigned. President Gay at Harvard University, the Board of Trustees have recently released a letter saying, hey, they're going to stand by their woman, and they're not going to do anything about it. What is going on? And is there a way back to sanity when it comes to the American university?
Well, first of all, I think there's definitely elements within the left that is surprised by the response from students on university campuses, by some of the responses from university presidents. I got to tell you, I'm really not. I'm really not. Nothing was said in those committee meetings that that shocked me. And The reason why is because if you pay attention to the direction that the left has been going, and when you look at like Harvard University, about 80% of the faculty describe themselves as either being liberal or very liberal. And again, that doesn't mean that 20% consider themselves to be conservative. It's something like less than 3% identify as conservative. So what does that mean? Well, once upon a time, what liberal meant in the United States was you wanted a bigger welfare state. You supported freedom of speech, no matter how crazy it got, but you supported it. You wanted you believed in civil liberties. And really what it came down to was a difference in opinion with respect to how active the government should be with respect to regulating the economy or again, a very generous welfare state. That is not what the current left is in the United States. The whole idea, the current left is not liberal, it's leftist. It's more authoritarian, and it is rooted in critical theory. And critical theory is something of a Marxist adaptation. And whenever you say that, people out of, oh, look, the commies are coming. The guy, no. I'm just saying they're happy about it. They're proud to say it. It's not something that I'm not saying they're Soviets. What I'm saying is that they essentially believe in the Marxist explanation of the world. And the Marxist explanation of the world and the critical theory explanation of the world is that Western society, Western capitalist society, was created by a certain group of people, and call it the patriarchy, call it oppressors, whatever it wants, but they have set up all of these various institutions, organizations, political and economic structures in order to benefit themselves at the expense of the oppressed, right, of marginalized populations, whatever it is. And if you look at Gramsci, who was a socialist thinker in Italy in the 20s and 30s, eventually died in prison. One of the things that he recognized right off the bat was Marxist ideology wasn't winning out in the places that Karl Marx expected to win it out, which was industrialized capitalist countries. It was winning out in countries that were far more poor, that were far more autocratic. That's where it was winning out. And Gramsci came up with this idea that it's because there's this culture that supports the idea of capitalism, private property rights. And the only way that you're going to be able to overcome that is if you actually set up a counterculture. And the way that you do that is you gain influence within culturally shaping institutions within the sort of areas that you want to bring about to a socialist or a Marxist ideal. And this kind of got dubbed, not by Gramsci, but by others, as the march through the institutions. And again, this is not conspiratorial. It's not as if, I mean, yeah, you have things by active measures. Yuri Bezmen obviously talked about this, Soviet infiltration of things like labor unions and the academy and Hollywood. And look, by the same token, the US was also trying to be influential in the Soviet Union, right? This is just part of the game. But what you found over time, especially when you saw the beginning of the progressive era within the United States and kind of the first time you had a president like Wilson that was kind of openly hostile to the Constitution, thought it was, an impediment to all the great things and wonderful things he was going to do with the large bureaucratic state that he wanted. And then you see it with FDR and the New Deal and the massive expansion of federal power. And then you see this revolution within the university system in the 1960s. And I'm not talking about the civil rights component. I think we're all very happy that we drastically increased civil rights. It was more about the whole changing of the idea with respect to very, very negative toward capitalism, negative toward this idea of private property rights. The sexual revolution, essentially the disintegration of what we would call the nuclear family, all of that together. But the most important thing, because I know this has been a long explanation I'm kind of giving here, but the reason why none of what surprised me about what's coming out of those universities is because in the critical theory model, in the woke model, if you will, right? It's the idea that, once again, all of society can be broken down into oppressors and oppressed. If you fall into the oppressor category, you're bad. If you fall into the oppressed category, you're good. In the mindset of leftist academia, the Palestinians fall into the category of the oppressed. Who's their oppressor? Israel. Therefore, Israel's bad. And that's why they don't see any sort of like obvious contradiction when you see a big sign that says Queers for Palestine. It's like, you notice there's not a lot of gay pride parades in Gaza, right? Like the reason why is because it's illegal and could like get you killed to do that. And yet there's this strange alliance there. Why? Well, because in liberal academia, if you're in the oppressed category, you are supposed to work with whoever else is in that oppressed category against the oppressors. And the oppressors are not, you don't get that designation because you've actually oppressed someone. You get that designation if you believe in things like individual liberty, limited government powers, free market capitalism, private property rights, right? Because those are the institutions that are holding us back from this, Marxist utopia. And so, yeah, if you look at what has happened over the university system, especially, it goes way beyond this, but especially when it really started to kick into high gear in the mid 90s, this is the direction they've been going for decades now. And now we're starting to see it play out. Now it escaped from the university. It's made it into our public school system. It's made it into arts and entertainment, and now it's fighting to become the predominant cultural explanation for things. And so, yeah, none of this surprises me.
Yeah.
Since 1971, Liberty University has had one mission: training champions for Christ. We've been at this for a while, and in the shadow of the Blue Ridge Mountains, we have grown to be a global force. Today, Liberty runs over 100,000 students around the globe, studying across 15 colleges and schools. And, among them, over 30,000 military students. Across 700 programs of study, we train as one: nurses, artists, business leaders of the future and today. Together, we work to give back through service trips, local community work, and over 500,000 volunteer hours per year. And we play just as hard as we study, with 20 NCAA athletic programs and 40 club sports teams. So, who are we? We are Liberty University, and we train champions for Christ.
Very well said. I love the history you walked through. That's awesome. Because a lot of people, and I when I'm talking to kind of the older generation, they are just absolutely shocked by what they're seeing. I had a group of pastors. I was just down in Florida not too long ago, and a couple of hundred pastors in a room, and I'm talking through, socialism, but they're thinking in terms of just economic. I'm talking about Marxism, socialism, that kind of thing, but just in terms of pure economics. They're not thinking in terms of cultural. And Gramsci is a perfect example of this thing. And what's interesting, there's something that you said when you were talking about, poorer nations, versus richer nations. I'll just point this out. With respect to the last 500-year history, it was the Protestant nations that developed market-based economies. And that came out of this whole kind of revolution where the church was decentralized, political power was decentralized. There was all kinds of banking and all kinds of other things that came through that, mercantilism and everything else. It was the Dutch Netherlands that formed the first publicly traded company that allowed people like artisans to buy shares in that company and get rich off of it. Catholic countries adopted a more caste system economy. But you think about this, Italy, you think about Spain, you think about even France, and then you look at even the colonial systems like Brazil and other places. This is where liberation theology grew. This is where a lot of Marxist theory was quite pervasive. And it was largely because these societies did not have a form of market-based capitalism by which people could basically get rich. They could better themselves. They could work hard and reap the benefits. It was largely in those Protestant countries where that was possible, including the American colonies and then later the United States. And in most of our social revolutions were not were fought out through the marketplace of ideas. And so certainly we had a civil war, but we also had movements, including the civil rights movement and everything else. So it's just interesting in terms of the histories there. And what the thing about this cultural Marxism is it was pervasive largely in places where things were falling apart. And what's interesting is that right now we have a society that is trying to turn the government into a cartel rather than a government that is working as a representative body, a delegated power and authority by the American people. It is trying to invert itself and change itself completely, where they have all the power and we don't. Anyway, I love what you just said there. My question is there a way to win it back in the United States? I know that the universities seem lost, and almost like a lost cause. Like there is no chance. They're sitting on billions of dollars in endowments. How do we even get that back? Do we create more alternatives? What do we do? And then also the K through 12 education system. You talk quite extensively about that. How do we win that back?
Well, yeah. So I serve on the education committee in the Virginia House of Delegates, and I'm the chairman for the subcommittee on higher education. And when people ask me, well, what do we do our better education system? I don't mean this to be flippant, but you leave it. And I know for a lot of people are looking at going, well, wait a second. I can't afford to do that, or that's too difficult. Or do you mean, well, no, we got to fight for it. Like, okay, well then let me explain to you what fighting for it in its current manifestation looks like. You're a parent. You're upset about what's happening at your kid's high school because you just found out that they've got books in there depicting pornographic images. And I'm not talking about literature that tells a spicy story. No, I'm saying you open up and there's the pictures of it going on. You're like, well, this is inappropriate. I can't believe my tax dollars are going to this. So what do you do? Well, the first thing you do is you say, I can't believe this is going on. And then what happens is the local newspaper and members of the school board all say that you're crazy and this isn't going on and this is ridiculous. And then you show up like with the actual book saying, no, here it is. And then they all look at you and they go, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. We didn't realize that. We apologize. Yeah, you're right. That is inappropriate. Oh, wait, no, that's not what they do. They turn around and they look at you and they ask, why are you being so divisive? Why do you hate? Why do you hate what you don't understand? Why can't you just be more accepting? So you notice what just happened there, right? The first thing that you did is you pointed out something that was going on, and then all the people came out and said, that's not happening. And then when you showed that it was happening, they didn't say, oh my gosh, I'm sorry. They started attacking you. So they called you a liar to start with. And then when you proved that you were telling the truth, they didn't apologize for calling you a liar. They didn't apologize for their own, stated ignorance that it wasn't there. No, they started attacking you. Why is that? Well, because as much as people will say, well, nobody wants that in the classroom or nobody wants that in the library. Yes, they do. And you need to start asking yourself that question. Why? Why would they want that? Why would they want that in a classroom? Why would they want that in a high school public library? Why would they want to have more and more of these conversations where they're talking about, sexual conversations that I think a lot of people, if they actually knew what was going on, would say, well, that's not appropriate. Sex education is not just, we're going to explain human biology and what your body is going through. You start to look at some of the recommendations coming out of the United Nations. Oh, they want to have much more in-depth conversations with your child about sex and a whole host of things that anybody 5 years ago would have said, oh, no, that's too far. That's too far. And yet it's not. And yet you got parents complaining all over the place. Do you see major changes happening in public school systems all over the country? No. You see it in some locations where you actually have a state legislature that might be willing to push back a little bit. But here's what you're going to find, even in places like Idaho, where the state legislature came in and said, no, you're not going to teach critical race theory within the schools, and you're not going to have this sort of material. You're going to stick to reading, writing, mathematics, basic civics, things like that. And then they go in there with undercover cameras, and what do they find? Well, they find principals and administrators saying, yeah, we still teach it. We're not allowed to call it that. And so what needs to be understood is that this is not the result of a bill that was passed in a state legislature or a rogue librarian. This is the result of decades and decades and decades of a university system which buys into everything I just talked about, educating your teachers and being responsible for the ones giving them the credentials. And so now, even if you have a whole host of teachers that don't like what's going on, they don't make the decisions. This is a government-run school. Ultimately, those decisions rest in the hands of politicians. And if you can look at your state legislature and you can look at the composition of it, I can tell you what they will allow in your public school library. And you're not going to be able to do anything about it. If you want to kid yourself, you're a parent living in Massachusetts right now, if you would like to play make-believe that you're going to be able to go and speak up at the local school board meeting or go, re-elect somebody in the Massachusetts state legislature, and this is going to go away. If that makes you feel better, go ahead, but you're not going to actually change anything. If you want to have the greatest possible impact you possibly can right now, you pull your kid out. And look, this is not to, please hear me. This is not a dig on all public school teachers or public school administrators or all librarians. Of course not. I know excellent people. I have family that work within the public school system who are trying to do an incredible job under the constraints that they have. But the public school system was set up for the mass production of education. It doesn't have your child in mind. It was set up for the mass production of education. It is run, funded, and managed by the government. The government has certain objectives. It's largely determined by the states. If you are in a state that is incredibly left-wing, then this is the reality of your public school system. And if you keep your kids in it, they might be fine. They might be fine. They might be able to navigate it just fine. You may be an incredibly active parent and whatnot. But if you were living under the assumption that, again, you're going to be able to have some major change by showing up to a school board meeting or just being involved, that's not reality. And anybody that tells you different, I think, is lying to you or is ignorant with respect to the depth of the problem. Because Virginia is not California. And yet, we just had a Republican House. We had a Republican House, a Democrat Senate, and a Republican governor. We had a Republican AG. We had a Republican lieutenant governor. We had a bill that said, if we listed out certain books, we gave like demonstrations of them. We showed them in the House chamber, to which our Democrat colleagues got upset about because it was inappropriate, apparently. Fine to be in your public school library, but inappropriate to show on the House floor. And we showed, here's the books, here's the depictions, here's the pictures. All the bill said was that if you have books like this that depict things like this, you need to have a place on your library website in the public school system, not the public library, the public school system. You need to be able to parents need to be able to go onto that website, see that they're there, and then opt their child out of being able to check out the book. That's it. That's all the bill did. We didn't get one person from the other side of the aisle to vote for that. Not one. Not one person on the other side of the aisle said, okay, you know what? I don't agree with banning books, or I don't agree, but parental notification is a good thing, and this seems to be a reasonable compromise. Not one. In Virginia. So guess what happened to that bill? It passed the House, and it died in a subcommittee in the Senate where 3 people looked at it. That was it. So this is why I say we had the outrage, all the stuff that was going on in Loudoun County and Fairfax County that the Daily Wire exposed, that went off about, kids getting raped in a public school bathroom, and the superintendent essentially, obfuscating what actually happened and just transferring the student to another school where he reoffended, right? Great. What did we get done? What did we get done significantly? Next to nothing, because they killed it all in the Senate. That's Virginia. So if you're living in somewhere to the left of Virginia, well, then that's what's happening within your public school system. And oh, by the way, the same institutions of higher education who are engaging in the sort of activities that we've been seeing on our screen. And I'm not just talking about Israel and Hamas. I'm talking about the universities, which also fund the hospitals, which provide transition surgeries for minors. Right? Those are heavily subsidized by your tax dollars. So the same university system, which is sitting, we'll use one in Virginia that is sitting on about a $10 billion endowment, comes down to Richmond every year in order to advocate for more tax funding to support the university. And it's always under the auspices of, well, this is the only way we can keep tuition low. Okay, so let me get this straight. The government is heavily subsidizing you, which means taxpayers are heavily subsidizing you. And then you're subsidized again because we get about all these federal loans to students seeking a college education. So you're getting tuition, plus you're getting massive subsidization, plus you're allowed to start these other industries, which are also partially subsidized. And you're doing all of this, and you're requiring, like I actually asked one of the representatives from a university. I said, you keep telling me that what you do is so important and what you do is so valuable, and the education that you provide is so critical. So here's my question. If that's true, why are you asking me to take money from my constituents and give it to you? Why can't you convince them to donate it or attend your university or do any of that? Why is it that you want me to steal it from my constituents and give it to you? And so this is the problem with our education system at the higher levels. It's the problem with the education at the lower levels. You are not the customer. Your child is not the customer. You want to know who the customer is? Me, because I get to vote on the budget. So elected representatives are the customers. You as the parent are not the customer. You as the child are not the customer. You're not the customer. Get that out of your head. I am, because I vote on the budget.
So you're looking for a university that's perfect for you, a school that has anything you could possibly need.
Anything?
You want a place that has the programs you want to study, and maybe a few more, just in case you change your mind.
I think I'm going to sign up for the fashion design program.
All right. A place with state-of-the-art facilities. I mean, look at this campus.
And who doesn't love big time sports?
And great recreational activities.
Okay, now we're on a roll. Somewhere you can hike, slide, strike, shoot, climb, eat, and most importantly, eat. You want a place that takes you to space? Okay, maybe not, but we can teach you how to fly, or pastor a church, or run a business. And all that with a great view? Yeah, I think I know a place.
Yeah. That's so well said. And by the way, there is no reason for me to interrupt what you just said. Those last 6 or 7 minutes was excellent. The reality is, most parents who might be listening or watching, you have the leveraging power in the sense that your child is what matters the most. It's not tax dollars, because I can guarantee you at the end of the day, if there was a mass exodus out of the public system where you have a minority now being educated by all of the public purse and the majority are into alternatives, whether it be private school, pod school, homeschool, you name it, right? Then you all of a sudden have a problem, because politically that just doesn't work. They want to mandate that everybody goes. They want it union controlled. It's 3.2 million that are in the NEA, the largest teachers union in the United States. But it's all about collective bargaining. It's all about power. It's not about results. It's not about education. They want to control that. That's why they kind of show. I am all for the parents going to the public school, the public board meetings. I'm all for that. But at the end of the day, it is almost like a show trial, because they're not going to change anything. I appreciate standing up. I appreciate putting public right. We need to. And we need to continue to push that. But you're right that they know that they do have the power, and the union is backing them. The union is even giving, I've seen releases where the union has even talking points for administrators, superintendents, how you address these questions, whether it be social emotional learning or critical theory or sex ed, how you address these things, how you make them go away. How you respond publicly. They're doing that because at the end of the day, they're not scared. They believe that they hold all of the chips. And so they're not accountable to the public. They're not accountable to the taxpayer. And just to your point, who really is the customer? Well, it's your local legislator who gets to vote on how these dollars are spent. So people are missing that. But I also want to say too, that when it comes to children, there is a fundamental responsibility that every parent has. Single parents, parents who are, God-fearing, two-parent household, one-parent household, it doesn't matter. You all have a responsibility to protect your children. You have to protect them. You cannot hand them over to woke Marxists. You can't hand them over to sexual groomers. It is going to get tough. It's already tough financially, economically, but in terms of, I can't just go to work and drop them off here and trust that they're going to be okay. I really have to think about where I'm sending them and what's happening with my child while I'm away.
Well, and I don't want to be doom and gloom here with my comments, because I agree with everything. I don't want to be doom and gloom with my comments. We had our kids in public school for about a year, year and a half. And then we homeschooled them the rest of the way. I have a 21-year-old daughter. I have an 18-year-old son. I have another daughter that's about to turn 16. And here's what I want people to understand. Is it a financial strain to only have, one predominant income or one income in the house, and for my wife to choose to not just manage the home, but actually manage my kids' education? Yeah, of course it is. But here's what I'll tell you. So many of the issues that I've seen good friends of mine have to deal with in the public school system, whether it be violence, whether it be inappropriate sexual contact, whether it be drugs and exposure to them, we didn't have to deal with those. And it's not because our kids missed out on life experiences. It's not because we kept them locked up in the basement, right? We went all over the place, did all kinds of things. Education in our home was not a building you went to. It was a daily experience that you had through a number of mechanisms that taught you a variety of life skills, theological understanding, philosophical understanding, critical thinking, budgeting, management, entrepreneurship. Is that all because we were geniuses? No. My youngest daughter is using the Liberty homeschool program for part of her home education. We've used co-ops.
Nice plug. Thank you.
Right? We've used co-ops before. I've taught at co-ops before. And what we found was that we just had this amazing experience with our children informing what their education looked like. And did we make mistakes? Sure. There's all kinds of things I would look back and say, I do this a little bit differently. I do this a little bit differently. But I will tell you, at the end of the day, here's what I have. I have 3 kids who are responsible, know what they believe, can articulate it, are ambitious with respect to what they want to do for their lives, are very secure in their identity and their faith. And they're people I want to be friends with. And my wife and I got back thousands of hours with our children by going through that experience. And so what did it mean? Well, it meant we couldn't go on as many family vacations, right? It meant we couldn't, I think we went on like 3 their entire childhood. It meant we didn't have nice cars. It meant we didn't have a really nice house. But we have a relationship with our kids that I would not trade for anything. And they have a relationship with their faith, with us. They have a confidence in again, who they are, that I would not trade for anything that we would have gained by dropping them off at a public school. And again, I'm not trying to be harsh here, but I want people to understand that there are so many resources that didn't exist 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. When you look at the number of resources that are available right now, it is incredible. There has never been a better time to homeschool or to come up with some sort of variation. There has never been more access to free information. There has never been more people that are experienced, that know how to do this, that desperately want to help you do it if you're at all interested. Like, it is all there, and I am telling you, for all the work, it is wonderful. It is absolutely wonderful. One of the biggest things, my wife pointed this out when we were at a conference a while back. She goes, one of the biggest cultural things that we noticed. Let's take 2 amazing kids. One went to public school, one went to homeschooling. One of the things that we noticed is that a lot of the people that we knew whose kids went to public school, the hardest years for them were their teen years. Those were the hardest years with their kids. Those were the easiest for us. Why? Because they're teenagers. They understand. They can interact better. They can work. They can help out more. The older kids can help with the younger kids. Right? It makes sense that your older, more capable, more intelligent children, right? And by intelligence, I mean just gaining knowledge over time, that they would be able to be more of an asset to the family. So why is it that in the public school system, it seems to be the exact opposite? Well, it's because your kids have grown up in an institution that you've told them to respect, which has either subtly or overtly, either through teachers' curriculum or just their peers, deliberately undermined the values and faith you brought them up with at home. And they had 7 to 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, 9 months out of the year with your child. So yeah, of course, when your kid gets to be in their teenage years, well, now you have someone that is a lot more apt to be rebellious. And I don't mean rebellious in a form of questioning. Like, I love the fact that my kids have all asked us hard questions and wanted to know. And we didn't say, that's just the way we told you, or that's just the way we raised you. No, okay, yeah, that's a good question. Let's analyze it. Let's research it. Let's think about it critically. right? But we didn't deal with this massive rebellion. I have no frame of reference for that for my kids, because again, I wasn't sharing the vast majority of their formative years with an institution where the books, some of the teachers, some of the administrators, and a lot of their peers are telling them that, well, your parents are just horrible heteronormative members of the patriarchy that want to, oppress you.
That is actually the textbook label that they throw out there, by the way. Nick, it has been a great conversation, and I certainly appreciate having you on. But I want to bring you back on at some point, and I want to talk about this woke culture and masculinity. But I appreciate so much how you articulate conservative principles. I appreciate so much that you stand up for the Christian faith. You are very sharp and articulate with the policies and how you sort of interweave them with a biblical worldview. And so I appreciate so much what you're about. And thank you so much also for the fact that you did make the sacrifice in order to raise your children in the fear and that admonition of the Lord. And you did homeschool. And I would absolutely echo, because I have 3 kids myself, that you are going to drive used cars. You're not going to go on the nice vacation. You're going to live in a smaller house. But at the end of the day, you would not trade any of that, not any of it, for the world. And appreciate so much your candor and courage. And thank you for joining the Give Me Liberty podcast. And folks, stick around for final thoughts. Hey, thank you for watching the Give Me Liberty podcast. Please like and subscribe and share with a friend. Merry Christmas, by the way. Only a true friend can give the gift of the Give Me Liberty podcast. Look, we are so grateful to Nick Freitas for joining us on this episode. He is articulate, he's sharp, he has thoughtful analysis, especially when it comes to matters of the public square. Look, the state of American education is eye-opening, and there is certainly a call to action. There is no such thing as a value-neutral worldview, and there is no such thing as a value-neutral classroom. The very idea of education is predicated on the assumption that there is truth, that there is some kind of grand narrative, a totalizing reality, the world in its totality, that there is such a thing as good, as there is such a thing as evil. We believe not only in permanent things, but eternal things. If your children's school is not teaching them the truth, and I would even say and argue the truth of God's word, then it will be predicated largely on a lie. Nick is absolutely right when he points out that the American education system, like many other of America's institutions, has been intentionally infiltrated by cultural Marxism. Cultural Marxism rejects the idea of objective truth. It also rejects the idea of a totalizing morality. Instead, it teaches that truth is whatever benefits the oppressed class in pursuit of a revolution. At the end of the day, they are about social upheaval. They are about turning the world upside down. This explains why the presidents of 3 of America's most highly regarded academic institutions refuse to say that calls for genocide go against their school's code of conduct. What am I talking about? University of Pennsylvania, Harvard University, MIT, UPenn, ultimately, their president resigned. Harvard University, their board of trustees is standing by their president. Remains to be seen what happens at MIT. Sounds like they're going to go with them and stick by them. But as Christians, the education of our children is our responsibility. Nowhere in Scripture is that responsibility delegated ultimately to another, especially not the state. Proverbs 22:6, many of you know it, says, train up a child in the way they should go, and when they are old, he will not depart from it. So be bold. Train your children in the truth of God's word. hold your ground as a parent, because guess what? You're responsible. There's a quote from a good friend of ours, Vodi Bakum, that summarizes this all so well. He once said, "We cannot continue to send our children to Caesar for their education and be surprised when they come home as Romans." Until next time, God bless you.